Hey, what's going on, everybody? James here, and today we are going to continue our series of watch basics. So we're continuing that, and we're going to talk today about the different dial finishings that you might encounter out there in the watch world. So last video, if you saw, we talked about movement finishing techniques and some examples of that. So today we're going to get more into what it looks like on the dial side. And there's a lot to cover here because there are such a variety of dials out there in the watch world. So it's going to take doing a little bit of exploration, doing some checking on Google or Chrono24 or whatever you want to look at. But because there are just so many different types of dials to cover. And obviously I'll have some examples here to show, and we'll talk about a lot of different brands as well. So what we're going to start with today is we're going to start with probably one of the more popular versions of a dial, and that is what you call a Sunray finish or Sunburst dial. And that is something like this with Rolex, where you have a reflective surface kind of from the center that goes outward, and it changes based on the light. So I'm trying to get it in picture here so you don't just get the anti-reflective coating of the sapphire, but what you can see there is that the dial itself is changing color, and it kind of has a different level of shine to it based on how I'm moving it in the light. And so you'll see that a lot. So again, examples of this are like this Rolex Sky Dweller. There are Datejust models that you'll see that have a similar type of finishing. There's a lot of Omegas that have this type of finishing to them. Aquaterra models, for instance, IWC, some of the Pilot watches, and even Guilloche Original with some of their colorful dials. Like they've got like a really deep green dial, that's kind of a sunburst one. Quite a few options to pick from there. Well, let's move on to the second type we're going to talk about, which is lacquered dials. So again, the look here that you'll notice is it looks smooth. There's no texture to it, but it almost has this vibrant, glossy type of look. Like it looks like if I would touch it with my finger, then my finger would end up with something on it, like it's wet. And that is often achieved through using layers of lacquer, which is essentially a paint. But that's pretty much what you see on this. So this is a Dan Reuter 02. So Dan is a great guy, and he uses lacquered dials. The Omega, there's a black lacquered Aquaterra that's been really popular out there. So that's been a prominent one. Obviously, some really well-known versions of lacquering are going to be like your Vacheron Constantin overseas Gen 3 models. So they've got like black, they have blue, and then maybe the most famous one and kind of an unattainable piece would be like your FP Journe Chronomètre Bleu, which is a combination of using a translucent lacquer on a metallic base. So, this one is more opaque. You can't really see through it. You just get that vibrant color. But Vacheron and FP Journe utilize some of those translucent lacquers where you can partially see the metallic base that's underneath the lacquer, and you get this really cool lacquered effect. If you ever get a chance to see one of those in person, I would highly, highly recommend. All right, let's keep going. Now, I don't really have a great example of this one, so I'm just going to throw up the Grand Seiko because the dial texture on this is textured, but it's not necessarily reflective in any way. And so we'll talk about a couple of things with this example. So the first one would be matte dial textures. And those are going to be, again, flat. This one is not quite flat. You can see there's texture to it, but kind of non-reflective surfaces. There's no real shine to it. The shine that you're getting right here is off of the sapphire crystal, not off of the actual dial base. And so, some of them are very understated. They almost have kind of a chalk-like quality. Again, not necessarily in terms of texture. This is just kind of an example of that. But so something like that would be some of the older Rolex sub models. You'll see that where it's just almost like a chalky black and it doesn't reflect any light. Or Zinn, which is just SINN. It's a German brand, and they have ultra hard materials that they use for their cases. It's very interesting, and typically very matte and dark dials. So that's an example of matte. Now, this is obviously a Grand Seiko that is textured, but still kind of matte in terms of the light reflective quality on the dial in particular. So dials like this, they can be machine done, they can be hand done. In Grand Seiko's case, a lot of these are hand done, hand painted, hand applied, things like that. And many of them will use layering, again, like we talked about with lacquering. And the patterns can vary from anything like landscapes. So again, this one, the Skyflake dial, looking like snow, to trees like the white birch or the night birch are both great models from Grand Seiko. You've got things like textiles, so some of them look almost linen. So there's some like old even Rolex dials that have textile on them. Or to like frosting, so almost like a sandy grain texture looking one. Another very famous textured dial would be Audemars Piguet with their tapisserie dial. So it's almost like a series of little boxes that are cut into the dial, which are very cool. Or again, we go back to Omega with kind of their Aquaterra series. They have that teak deck striation pattern on them. So lots of examples to talk through with textured dials, but there are quite a few different variants and versions of this, from everything from being a flat and matte dial with not really any texture to something that's hand done or hand applied or even machined, but lots of different variations there to take a look at. Now let's go to probably one of the most interesting ones for me. So let's talk about this. So this is a Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin with an enamel dial, and it also has guilloché underneath the enamel. So let me try to explain what's happening with this one, because this is not something that you see a lot, but I think it's one of the coolest types of things in watchmaking. So if you look at this dial, it's got a technique called guilloché on the dial base. So the metal base of this dial is actually hand cut on a lathe. You can see my review of this watch where I kind of go in depth on that. But so those stripes are cut by hand from the center, radiating out to the edge of the dial all the way around. So it's pretty incredible. And then you can see within the sub registers of the perpetual calendar here, there are also other patterns of guilloché. So two different styles. So that's one technique that's used. The other is enameling, and that is what's what's on top of the guilloché, and it's actually powdered glass. So the brand will take powdered glass in varying colors, and they will actually apply it to the dial, and then they'll bake it on. So they'll put it into an oven, fire it several times. Some enamel is translucent, like this one, where you can see through it. Others are more opaque. So for instance, there's a JLC also has a dual matte version that has an enamel dial. And it's just a plain white, but it's like a solid white. It's not translucent. So, some different applications of this. For instance, like Ulysse Nardin has some enamel dials. Patek Philippe does some very decorative enamel dials, which are really beautiful, where they're almost creating art with the enamel, so that it's fired onto the dial, and you just get a tremendous artwork on the dial. So again, enameling, it almost looks wet if you get it from the side, but not quite in the same way as lacquer, where it looks like it's going to come right off. But you can kind of see as the light moves around on the enamel, you can kind of see that it has this reflective quality there's I think a greater depth to it, is what I would say, than sometimes the lacquering, which looks like it's just kind of flat. So that is enameling. And then within that, you also have Aventurine is another kind of example of this. So if you look at something like the Little Longa 1, or the UN Marine Torpilleur, they have Aventurine dials. So they look black, but they're very shiny, and they actually have bits of metal. Sometimes they'll even use precious metal, like with De Bethune, and it will actually show up in the dial to have this like starry night type of aesthetic. So if you look up the Little Longa 1, you'll see what that dial looks like. It's pretty incredible. Very, very cool. Some other examples, we have stone dials, where they're actually just going to take a piece of stone and again cut it, and then that will be the entire base of the dial. So Rolex does this with some. They have mother of pearl that they use quite a bit. Meteorite is pretty popular amongst watch dials if they're going to do something like that. So just a couple other examples. And then the last one, I don't have an example to show you, but other than flipping over the back of the watch, because the last example would be a skeleton dial or an open work dial, which essentially they'll omit the entire dial base. So it just won't have a base, and you'll be able to just see right into the movement on it. Or sometimes you'll see where companies will put a piece of sapphire as the dial base. So just like the crystal is made of sapphire, they'll put a piece of sapphire on the dial base so that they can still apply, the indices, the hands, any other functions, but you still can see right into the movement. So some examples there would be like Hublot, Zenith has like some skeleton models, Parmigiani Fleurier, PF, they have some really beautiful skeleton watches. Or I believe even Vacheron Constantin, they have a few dials like that where again there's a sapphire base underneath and you can see into the movement, but you can still get all the obviously functionality of the dial still available. So that is a few different examples of what you may see in terms of dial finishing. Again, it's useful to know just so that as you're looking through watches, or maybe just to help you identify what you want to go after in terms of your interests. Again, this watch for me, one of my favorites in the collection because of the amazing hand guilloche work that is done on this dial. And then after they do all the guilloche, which takes a long time, then they have to do the enameling part, which also takes some time and precision to make sure that it's not overly heated, because like anything, if you're applying heat to it, it can crack, it can chip. So there's a lot that goes into creating a beautiful dial like this one. So that is, those are my thoughts on watch finishing, y'all. So thanks again for stopping by the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with your friends. Hopefully you picked up a couple of things about watch dials here. And again, as I always say, my goal for you is I hope you get out of watches whatever you want to get out of watches, because I want you to be a satisfied collector with what you have. So thanks for stopping by. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.